Good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here today. Happy Sunday. My name is Matt, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share with you all today. I do want to say up front, just so everybody knows, that a lot of the readings from today's lectionary have to do with death, and so that's going to be some of what I'm going to be talking about today. And I say that just because I want to make sure that everybody's able to take care of themselves and their families. I know that can be a hard thing to talk about, so if that's something that might encourage you to want to take folks to the parlor, I know I have 2 little kids, and that's something we do sometimes. So if that's something that you need to do today, feel free to do so. But just be advised that that's going to be out there. With that out of the way, since we're on the yearbook theme today, I wanted to start by talking about yearbooks. So I actually pulled out my own yearbooks in preparation for this, just to kind of think about yearbooks and get back in the swing of college, which has been a minute since I've been out of. But actually I had yearbooks going way farther back than that. So I actually have all my elementary school, junior high, and high school yearbooks. So you can see this is how I became the Adonis that you see before you today. It's from these 7th grade. Ooh, that is a tough photo. But yes, so all of these are the yearbook photos going all the way back. And so as I was going through these, one thing that happened was my daughters wanted to see them. I have a 7-year-old and a 4-year-old, and my 4-year-old and 7-year-old were looking at them with me, and the 7-year-old asked, "Was everything black and white when you were a kid?" Which made me feel like I was about 100 and reminded me that it's probably time to go start writing my will. So even in 2000 or 1996, apparently, everything was in black and white, in case you didn't know. But yes, so as I was looking through the yearbooks, one thing that stood out to me was, of course, seeing not just all the folks that I haven't thought about in many, many years, but how many of those folks were smiling. Of course, that makes sense on one level. It's the memorializing picture of your 5th grade or 8th grade or whatever grade, so you want to make sure that you're looking your best, and anytime we take a photo, we know that you're supposed to say cheese and smile really cheesily and big. But it was funny to look through that and remember that there were kids in high school who were not very happy, who were depressed, right? Who were in trouble, who were not getting good grades, who were doing drugs or doing all kind of things. But almost uniformly, as I'm looking through this yearbook, I see smile after smile, and all these people that I remember were not people that I especially thought of as happy classmates of mine. And so that was pretty interesting. Seeing those staged smiles, I think, is a helpful reminder that you don't always necessarily know what's going on with somebody. So just looking in the yearbook, if I had asked somebody to guess out of these people which was the one who died in a car crash later this same year, it would have been hard to know, even though in the time he was pretty depressed, and it wasn't too surprising to hear that he had been speeding at high speeds down the road. So I also see this kind of regularly in my job, because I actually work and have worked for a long time at colleges and universities. So I'm still working closely with students, even as I'm no longer a student myself. So for about 15 years, I've worked at a number of different universities. I started out in residence life, and residence life is working in the dorms on campus. So for any of you who have been to college, you have the opportunity to live on campus. You may have had an RA. I was an RA, and then I was a supervisor of an RA's. So right there, as you're going past Georgia Tech down 85, the big old Olympic Village. I was sort of in charge of the Olympic Village dorms for Georgia Tech for a while. And so in that role, I got to interact with lots of students. We had 750 students who lived in the buildings that I supervised. And usually out of those, there were lots who I didn't see, but the ones who I would see were either the ones who were really excellent students, right? They're the RAs who are helping in the halls. They're the ones involved in hall government. They're the ones who are getting some kind of award. Or I would also alternatively see the ones who were in trouble, right? Maybe I was seeing them for a conduct meeting or something like that because they had done something that they weren't supposed to do in the halls. I had residents in the halls who had 500,000 followers online because they were on a TV show. I had residents in the hall who had already formed a startup, sold their startup and had started their next startup at the age of 20. And also I had folks who failed out, who lived in my hall in the fall semester, and then come spring semester, they had failed out of Georgia Tech, and so they had to move out. I had folks who struggled with mental health disorders. I had all kind of folks, but if you looked at their yearbooks, I bet you would see kind of the same smiling faces. That would have been hard to guess who was who exactly. Sometimes these groups even overlapped, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk a little bit about. So I have one student who came to mind as I was thinking about this. Her name was Kirby. So Kirby lived in my hall. She was somebody who was pretty involved in our hall council, so I would see her regularly at hall council meetings. She and I had almost the exact same glasses, not these square circle ones, but we at the time had almost these exact same rectangular glasses. And she was also somebody that I knew from being involved in the LGBTQ Center at Georgia Tech. So Kirby was somebody who one article that I read had called her Georgia Tech's LGBTQ den mother. She was kind of the one who would meet new freshmen, help them get involved, get connected with the center. She had started a club through the LGBT Center at Georgia Tech. So she was somebody that I was really connected with. And then the year after she lived in my hall, she moved to Georgia State. She transferred. And during that year when she was at Georgia State, there was another student from the Georgia Tech LGBTQ Center who actually got killed by a police officer, who was Kirby's really good friend. And that had led to a lot of protests. And over the course of one of these protests, Kirby ended up getting arrested. And that was obviously a very difficult thing for a college student. A black trans woman doesn't necessarily have great outlooks in the criminal justice system, and so Kirby was very fearful of what was going to happen and ultimately ended up committing suicide. And that was really hard to stomach. My RA at the time, Raksha, was Kirby's best friend. Kirby was definitely her best friend in the world, and I don't think Raksha will probably ever recover from the shock of having that experience. I was certainly more removed from Raksha, but Kirby was still somebody that I knew pretty well, and it was very shocking, to say the least, to see somebody who I had known who was shy, happy. One remembrance about Kirby was that when Kirby was a little kid, she used to purposely drop pennies on the ground so that other people could find them, pick them up, and have good luck for the day. So that was kind of, I think, a good emblematic example of somebody thinking about others and just all of a sudden getting swept up in a tragedy that was way beyond what we expected. So this is actually the last photo, because Kirby and I were Facebook friends, so this was the last photo that she was tagged in online, and that photo was just a few months before Scout got shot, which ultimately led to Kirby being arrested. So it was really hard to kind of look back at Kirby's Facebook and remember, like, oh yeah, this was the year. Like, these photos are from the time where, like, she and I would interact most weeks, and then to think now it's been 6.5 years. So that's really hard. I see the same struggle again that I'm seeing with Kirby, because in this photo you can see again that you see her trying to sort of work up a smile. She struggled with mental health disorders, but nothing in this photo would have given you a clue that just a few months later her life would have been over. I see this struggle also in the current students I work with at Emory. So right now what I do is I work at Emory University as a sexual assault investigator. So anytime students, faculty, or staff allege that they've been stalked, that they've been assaulted, that they've been raped, then I'm somebody who's a fact finder to try to gather information and hold folks accountable if those claims are founded. That's a very, very hard position to be in sometimes, because I'm having to ask students about their worst moments, right? And I have to get really in depth sometimes to know kind of what happened and how did it come to happen and what happened as a result of what happened. And so as I'm working with students, a lot of times they'll submit evidence to me. And so just recently I had a case where I got a photo as evidence from the party right before an assault happened. So at the party, right, this male and female student are together, they're happy, they have their arm around each other, they're both smiling and laughing, and everything is great. And again, it made me think about this yearbook, right? This was just hours before things took a very different dark turn that this student didn't expect. But if you had looked at the photo and said, is this student having a good time? Of course, most people would have said, yes, it looks like they're having a blast at this party, which was the case until suddenly it was no longer the case. So you might wonder, why am I sharing such depressing stories with you? And it's because, honestly, a lot of the readings today are pretty hard. So normally on a given Sunday, you would have 4 readings to choose from. Today we actually have 7 readings to choose from. So when I was invited to speak today, I thought, 7 readings, that'll be no problem. I can find something uplifting to talk about in 7 readings. But the choices today were to talk about King David mourning the death of his best friend Jonathan. That was the first option. No good. Then the second one was a psalmist begging God for forgiveness for all of the sins that Israel had committed. That's kind of a downer, no. A philosophical reflection about how death came into the world. Not ideal. Another reflection about how do I handle this grief when it feels like God isn't listening. That's 0 for 4. A psalmist thanking God for saving them from death. So still got death there, but at least this time we got rescued from it. Paul telling a rich church that they should just be giving more money away. Well, that could be. And then the last one was a story about Jesus healing a woman who had been hemorrhaging for 10 years and then raising a dead 12-year-old back to life. So lots of death throughout all of these readings. And again, thinking about it like the yearbook photos of these biblical characters, I was thinking we have, of course, a children's Bible at home. And in the children's Bible, everyone is very much like this. They're all sort of smiling. They're happy to see Jesus or happy to be on the ark, not drowning, right? There's lots of happy faces in the children's Bible, but nobody's really in the children's Bible mourning for their dead friend. Nobody's in the children's Bible talking about giving away their money. Nobody's in the children's Bible on their knees pleading with God to forgive them for all the bad things that other people have done. So I was thinking about these readings and how would the people in them look in the yearbook. And again, sort of like thinking about Kirby or thinking about these students at the party before the assault, you could see them in both ways. David and Jonathan were best friends. Jonathan was the one whom David said that Jonathan's love was so dear to him that when he died, he said, I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. This is David's very, very best friend in the whole world, and he's slain in battle, and that's really heartbreaking. But this is also the same David, right? God's chosen hero who slays Goliath, who becomes king, who's like a man after God's own heart. So you could definitely find yearbook pictures of David where he's triumphant and victorious, but in other moments that we don't always see or talk about, David really is hurt and is not the smiling figure that we sometimes imagine. The psalmist in one of these options today sort of accused God of abandoning him, said, you hid your face from me, God, and I was dismayed. But then at the end of that very same psalm, he tells God, but you turned my mourning into dancing, because he's thankful that God recovered and helped him get back. And so we see both the depths of despair, feeling abandoned and left behind by God, and also the joy of remembering that actually wasn't the case all along, that I'm safe and God didn't forget about me. The woman who was hemorrhaging in Jesus' story, the way that she's initially described is that she was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, but she was no better, but rather grew worse. So this is a woman who's not going to be a smiling figure in a biblical story or a yearbook. But then at the end, once she touches the hem of Jesus' garment, she's healed. And when Jesus turns around and asks, "Who touched me?" she acknowledges that it was she. And Jesus says, "Go in peace and be healed of your disease, and that your faith has made you well." So she has both the depths of despair. I mean, 12 years of just getting worse and worse and worse from a disease. And then also the joy that imagine feeling the joy of having that burden just evaporate suddenly. So all of these folks in these stories, and just like some of the students that I work with, are struggling both with major hardships that they don't shy away from sharing, but also they're a part of God's plan even in the midst of that brokenness. So they have both the smiling face and the hidden challenges going on at the same time. So that's why I brought this guy. This is not something I purchased for this sermon. This is something that I just keep on my desk to really spice up conversations with my coworkers. I used to work with a guy who was a Hindu priest. He was kind of like the vice pope in his order of Hinduism. And he said that I should name my skull Mori, which is like the talk show host, because of a concept that I love called memento mori, which is to remember that you're going to die. That's basically what it means. And so this is why in old paintings, right, you'll see these Renaissance paintings where there's like a skull with a candle on somebody's desk. That's a memento mori. Or when you read Hamlet in class and he picks up the skull and starts saying, "Alas, poor Yorick, I knew him well." That's a memento mori. That's kind of telling you what's coming in the book. So I keep it on my desk at work, and it's kind of a helpful reminder for me to center. I know this is weird, but it reminds me that if I had a super productive day and everything went great, I got everything checked off my to-do list, that's awesome. And also someday that's not going to matter because I'm never going to look back on this day and think, "Ooh, I didn't do enough on that day in 2024. At the end of my life, I know that's not going to be the big thing that matters. Same thing if I didn't get everything checked off my to-do list. It helps me sort of keep things in perspective. And regardless of how good or bad a day was, it reminds me that I can at least be thankful that I've been given another day. So strangely enough, I actually finished the draft of this sermon Wednesday night, and then Thursday morning I went on Facebook and I found out that my daughter's godmother just died. She's somebody who lives right around here. She lived in Johns Creek. She's somebody that we knew from church, just like this. Somebody who's helped my family immensely, somebody who really loved and cared for my daughters. She had suffered from cancer for years, so it wasn't that it was shocking or traumatic or unexpected. But I still, even though it could have been any day in the past 10 years that this happened, it was surprising on Thursday to just wake up and see it. And that's kind of what a memento mori does, is it reminds us that this could be any day for any of us. And I know there's a prayer on the Feast of All Souls Day that talks about those we love and see no longer. And that's kind of how I'm feeling this week about Katie, my daughter's godmother, somebody who was really important, who is now never going to be somebody that I see again in this life. And that's hard. I think sometimes when we think about things like this, we feel like it's when we're in church, when we're talking about things like this, that it's supposed to be more like the yearbook, right? If somebody asks you, "Hey, how are you doing?" Just right off the cuff without even thinking, the first thing I would probably say is, "Oh, I'm good." That's pretty standard type of thing. That might be true. Oftentimes I'm doing great. But even if I weren't doing great, that's generally the same kind of response that I'm going to give. And why is that? It's because I sort of feel pressure to be this smiling yearbook photo so that people think that everything's okay, whether or not that's true. And that's not really what church is supposed to be. Pope Francis, for example, talks about church and said that church is supposed to be a field hospital after battle. That's the way Pope Francis describes church. A field hospital is not really a happy place, right? It's not a place where everybody's smiling. It's really a place where people are often in agony. And they showed up at the field hospital not because everything was hunky-dory and they had a big smile, but because there was some wound. And the more that they try to hide that fact by putting on a fake smile, the less help they're going to be able to get in that field hospital for what's really going on in their life. So when churches do communion, oftentimes there's a phrase that they'll say as the pastor is preparing for communion. They'll say something like, "Do this in remembrance of me." I remember when I was in seminary, I actually went to Emory, and where I now work, and went to the theology school there. And one of the classes I took there, we talked about that line, and the bishop who was teaching the class talked about the opposite of that word, remembrance, not being forgetfulness, right, but being dismembering. So contrasting remembering with dismembering. And that what we were doing in communion was remembering as the church, that we were taking Jesus' broken body and bringing it back together in the community of the church, working to heal up one another's wounds, heal the brokenness in the world, and that act of remembrance was part of what was going on in communion. Now, even though I won't ask you to do this, I bet it would be pretty awkward if I asked you to talk to your neighbor, whether it's somebody that you know or somebody you don't know, about something that's really broken inside you. That'd be a hard thing to do, to say, what am I really going through? What's really causing me to suffer or hurt or need to be remembered right now? And being in church doesn't mean that all of your problems miraculously go away. It could very well mean that. I don't want to foreclose that possibility. Jairus' daughter, the 12-year-old in the gospel today, she was dead, and Jesus came and brought something new out of that. The woman who had been hemorrhaging, something new came out of that. But also for Jonathan, who died in battle, he was not brought back to life, so David continued mourning for him. Kirby, Katie, they're not coming back anytime soon, I don't suspect, although I'll happily await such a miracle. I do want to read from one of the readings today, so let me tell you really quick about that one. That's from the book of Lamentation, not a book that often is a topic of a sermon in church, especially at chapel, but I think we have it here. It says, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul, therefore I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for one to bear the yoke in youth, to sit alone in silence when the Lord has imposed it, to put one's mouth to the dust, yet there may be hope, to give one's cheek to the smiter, to be filled with insults. For the Lord will not reject forever. Although he causes grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love, for he does not willingly afflict or grieve anyone." My mom actually used to sing the first two verses of this to me as a song. So there's a song that goes, "The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning, new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness, O Lord, great is thy faithfulness." And that's, even though it's from Lamentation, the book that we typically associate with grief and anguish and all of this, there's also hope interwoven in that. Just like in those photos, there can be hard things going on and also joy at the same time. That's a message that reminds us that we are never forgotten. It says right at the end, "For God does not willingly afflict or grieve anyone." God did not abandon King David, even in the midst of his grief about Jonathan. God did not abandon Jairus or the hemorrhaging woman. God did not abandon Kirby. God did not abandon Katie. God did not abandon me or you. God has given us this day, and there will be a day that will be the last day that each of us will have. For Katie, that day actually was this past Tuesday. For me, for you, it could be today. It could be in 60 years. I have no idea when that day will come. But what I do know is that when that day comes, we can take consolation from Paul's message that says, "For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Jesus Christ our Lord. That is a promise that each of us can hold on to, even in those moments where our cheesy yearbook smiles might falter. So with that, I want to say a quick prayer, and then we'll turn it over for our last song. All-knowing and eternal God, come to our help today as we remember Kirby, Katie, and all who have died. We know only in part, we love imperfectly, and we fail to ease one another's pain as you intend. But you are the God whose property is always to have mercy, and so we put our trust in you and ask the courage to go on. Through our Savior, Jesus Christ, who suffered for us and whom you raised to new life. Amen.